My name is David Yun, and welcome to my Viewfinder. This is a podcast where I speak to photographers about why they shoot, as opposed to what they shoot with. My hope is to produce inspiring content to get you out there looking at the world creatively. Each episode will end in a thought or project to help bring this to the fore, so make sure you get to the end and interact with me. If you're interested in continuing this project with me, you can help me out by clicking subscribe and leaving me a review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also find me on Instagram at My Viewfinder Podcast. I'm on Twitter at MVF Podcast, or you can email me directly at mvfpodcast@gmail.com. In this, the second part of my chat with Greg Gerla, we discuss his photography triangle: the photographer, the subject, and the viewer. Working to show the subject in their best light, but also working to understand the audience and their reaction. The reaction is never wrong, even when we don't like listening to it. Putting out work into the public is willingly engaging with them to elicit a reaction. When we are open to this conversation, we can grow as artists, and as people too. Any reaction is better than no reaction, and our reaction to said reaction can determine if and when we grow. That's a lot of reactions. I wonder how many reactions are too many reactions. I'll stop talking so Greg can get going, and I'll be back to chat about what we might think of next after this thought-provoking talk. Do you have a favorite person, and why?
Well, my mom, without a doubt. Strong, single mom, raised two kids, encouraged me. So family-wise, my mom, I'll tell you, gush a little bit. My favorite non-family person, I think, is George Weber. I don't know, you've talked to him?
Yes.
And he, to me, is, he's a great photographer. He's a terrific person. You know, he's so smart and he does such good work, and he's so humble. And I think I would encourage anybody, if you're listening, to look at his work. He's got several books out. He oftentimes, will do talks and exhibitions. I think he's a reviewer, portfolio reviewer at Exposure this year. But yeah, he's, I think, a really great guy. Good, talented, super talented, but good in all aspects too. So he's also a favorite person of mine.
Yeah, he's great. I like you. I interviewed him, and he's just such a balanced. He's just looking for balance.
Oh yeah,
it's fascinating to watch or to partake in, I should say.
Absolutely. I always feel better after either chatting with him or meeting with him or looking at his work. So yeah, absolutely.
My Viewfinder is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. If you're looking for more Albertan podcast content, check out their website, albertapodcastnetwork.com. If you're looking for other Alberta-owned content, check out the Dave Berta podcast. Dave Cournorier is an award-winning writer, podcaster, and communications professional based in Edmonton, Alberta. His podcast focuses on current affairs in the state of our province's government, a topic I think we're all sensitive about. Check his work out wherever you podcast, or you can find him at daveberta.ca, that's DAVEBERTA.ca, and of course you can find his and a whole slew of Alberta-based podcast content at albertapodcastnetwork.com. I mean, we are, of course, living in a new epoch in the middle of a pandemic, potentially the beginning of a generation of pandemics. Who knows what the future has in store? But what has that been like for you as a photographer? What kind of new pressures and so we're talking about a balanced diet and being open to everything, but fundamentally, our experience of the world has changed. So, what's your thoughts about how has that affected you in photography as you see it?
Well, it's been another challenge, and I think we're now in January, we're 8 or 9 months into this. And again, I'm going to throw this word out, which is such a cliche, but bear with me, it's unprecedented. And it has an effect on everything that people do in their daily lives. And as a photographer specifically, it's done the same thing. We have severe limitations about interacting with other people. And when it is allowed, it has to be done under these conditions that make it very difficult to connect and associate the way that we used to. From wearing a mask to social distance to some places at certain times not even being allowed to leave the house. So for a creative person, and again, this is personal, I can't stop taking pictures. So the silver lining has been the ability for me to engage in this practice in a very solo situation. So in the past, maybe shooting a commercial job where you've got a makeup artist and a wardrobe stylist, and you have models and art directors and an assistant. It's a very social process. And now, I'm probably, and I'll use the word, I've been forced to be a little more antisocial than normal because like I said, I'm looking after my mom who's elderly, so I have to be extremely careful about my actions. The silver lining to that has been this really great ability to work from the inside out. And like we talk about going for a walk, down by the river or, down back alleys or abandoned, streets or quiet streets where the creative process is just me and whatever I'm seeing. And I love that. I'm feeling now that it's getting to the point where it's a little unbalanced. I need to either take a picture of a person or work with somebody who also is involved in their creative process, whether it's a model or a makeup artist. And I'm getting to the point now where I'm really going to have to make a very careful effort to just go out and photograph somebody or work on a project with somebody where it's this combined effort to the common goal. But up to this point, it's been a really nice thing to just put some music in my head, headphones on, and my camera, and just go walk a trail or walk a street and let that process happen. And I think it's probably the same for everybody. And even the students that I'm teaching, we're teaching online, so that physical interaction is non-existent. And I think we're social people. Human beings are social. And again, some more social than others. But I think everybody has suffered to some degree by not being able to do this. It's like, I guess you can look at it again like a challenge that, this is one of our challenges that we have to go through. And when you come out the other end, it's really important to find the silver lining. It's there. And it might be a little bit different for everybody, but for me, it's just a way to, again, I think, really internalize my creative process. Would I have done it if there wasn't a pandemic? I don't know, but I have done it, and I've liked the results. It's just sort of taught me to again slow down and allow my creative process to be more internal. But yeah, having said that, I miss my creative peeps.
Yeah, I like to call this period a bit of a value checking exercise, and I think
that's a good term.
It's unsurprising, I think, learning a little bit about you, that it would take a creative tone for you, because it sounds like even from your first experience of photography that there's something maybe even intuitive or spiritual. I have found, my main focus has been on my health, but I have found, like with this podcast and taking pictures, and I was burning out before COVID, in a manner speaking. And as soon as we were allowed to go back outside, I found myself with my camera in hand. This podcast has helped a lot too, just speaking to creatives who are struggling. I don't know, like, do artists need an audience? We definitely need interaction. How is that? How is that going?
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I think ever since the first caveman painting the bison on the wall, we need an audience. Now, you can probably ask 10 artists and 10 of them will say, I don't care what people think of my work, I do it for myself. And there's an element of truth to that, but there's nothing better than either getting published or putting it on a gallery wall or or even in Instagram to some degree, having people push the little heart button. Like, we need that. That's part of, why we do what we do. And so I think that I think value adjustment, that phrase that you use, is perfect, because, and again, it's when we come out the other end of this pandemic, I think we will have a new appreciation, or maybe we will value that interaction. And it can be a creative interaction between, like I say, a subject and a photographer, or it can be the interaction between the gallery viewer looking at our work. And that's really important. And I think it's suffering now just because of the situation. So when we are able to get together, at least for me, I think I'll value it in a much different way. I always, again, think of being a photographer or an artist. I always talk of this triangle, and there's 3 points to the triangle. One point is the photographer. The other point is the subject. And the third point is the viewer. And we need to make those connections to complete that shape. And if we just think about the viewer and we don't engage with our subject, the photo fails. Or if we just think about the photographer and the subject and we don't think about the viewer, the photo fails. So we need to tie those 3 things in my mind, to make a successful picture. And that's a challenge now, whether it's a live subject or a live exhibition, those things are suffering right now. And, there's nothing we can do about it. But the good thing is, and it's like you say, that we'll have that, hopefully that adjustment to what we value, just a rejig, so that we can really appreciate those other 2 things, whether it's a live subject or, having an interaction with the viewer of our work. I think those are really important things.
It's a great lead. And I was going to ask you sort of a philosophical tangent, but I think it's funny that you brought this up in it's such a photographer's sense, the exposure triangle metaphor, but
I didn't think of it, but it's true, isn't it? Yeah.
I get caught up with this idea of the value of photograph to the photographer, to the subject, to the audience. Your work I'm fairly new in this game, but I've seen none of your commercial work except what you've posted on social media, but I've been to a few of your shows, and there are a lot of very, very different, varying themes, which I love. And there is also it's a very North American thing where the feedback loop is a little tainted by being polite, etc. But what has your experience been as far as aligning these things? How your subjects experience the event, if they're human beings, how you experience or what you intend for the photograph to mean, and how the audience experiences it. I mean, what does it mean to have a connection between those 3 points?
Well, the connection is really important. And I think, to me, sometimes what you expect is not the result. And that is always, I think, in a way difficult. Either the process between the photographer, and if it's a live subject, you need to create this connection, and that symbiosis of creativity, how much you control and how much the subject controls, that's a sliding scale. And the viewer, you can do an image and have it either, have the audience react in either a way you didn't expect or didn't anticipate. And at first, that's a jarring situation. You do a shot and somebody gets a completely different meaning or experience from it than what your intention was. But it's a really important thing, that jar. Sorry, I forgot. I totally lost track of what the question was. Is it important? It is, but it's, in a way, it's there's a certain element that you can't control. I think, and again, this is philosophical, is that the only thing I can control is either what I do or my response or my actions. I can't control how people read my work. but I can't disregard it either. So I think you need to start out being true to what you do. And I try to do this. I try to take a picture that pleases me in the hopes that it will please the viewer. And I know that sometimes that doesn't happen. But I think, and again, I'm sure I'm bringing this information from somewhere else that I've heard it, where somebody at some point said, a bad reaction is better than no reaction. So the work that I do, and some of the subject matter that I chose to shoot, like, an example is figure work. Shooting the nude figure is a really strong subject, and people have a strong reaction to it. Either they like it or they don't like it. And the reaction is never wrong. People don't have a wrong reaction. They may misinterpret, or they may approach it from a different place than you did, but their reaction is valid. And I think, and I believe that it's good to elicit a response rather than not. And that to me would be, if people had no reaction to my work, that would be a signal to me that I need to change what I'm doing. And if I was honest with myself, then maybe I would see that I'm not really doing anything that's pushing a boundary or allowing people to see something in a different way, or to have an experience that's an emotional experience that I did when I took it. If I'm not getting that, that's on me. But I think the artist, we like, again, it's sort of what I said before, you hear them say, I would take a picture or painting no matter what. I don't care if people like it or not. I don't know that that's true. I care if people like my work or don't like my work. But I hate it when there's no response. Having an adverse reaction to your work is, I think, especially if it's widespread. If one person doesn't like it, that's one thing. But if the majority of people either don't like it or have this visceral response, that to me is, again, a way for you to look back inside and say, what am I, why is that disconnect there between me and my viewer? And is it a good disconnect? Is that what I'm trying to do? Because, photography specifically, and art in general, can shock people. There's nothing wrong with that. That can be a good thing, as long as it's not done just for its own sake. That's where the power lies, in either making people talk, and I've had plenty of discussions with people who, maybe they're offended by nudity. And they're valid to have that feel, but we can talk about it and say, why is this? And maybe, hopefully I learn from what they have to say, and hopefully they learn from what I have to say. It doesn't mean we have to come to an agreement, but it broadens your scope of what you can anticipate a viewer or viewers, what their reaction might be. And that just makes you a better photographer. You don't have to stop doing what you do, but you do it with more knowledge because of the viewer and because of the feedback. And I would rather somebody say, I hate this photo and here's why, than somebody go, yeah, it's okay. So yeah, I think that that's really, really important.
Do you think, you have such a tempered approach to all this stuff. Is this something that you felt you've always been like, or has this taken some time to develop, when you were younger and just starting out?
And again, not just from the creative standpoint, but as a young person, you're never wrong. People, it's their fault. Either they're not looking at it right, or it's their fault. And absolutely that changes. And it changes in a great way, because I think as you get older, you have more experience, your ability to understand things outside yourself grows. And that's great. But the other thing is you also become a lot more either confident or self-assured in what you're doing. And again, there's that balance again. So it's a case of as I get older, I've learned a lot. I have a lot of experience. I know a lot of things. But as I get older, I also realize I don't know everything, right? And I think as a young person, and this is natural for everybody, that in your teenage years and early 20s, you know it all. You're a know-it-all. that's where that phrase comes from, and everybody experiences that. And so that's the benefit of, I think, of age, is though that sort of twofold thing. You learn that you don't know everything, but you also learn that you know a lot. So yeah, that's how I would approach that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking too, when you spoke earlier of, and not as an indictment of the many professionals or artists you've met, but perhaps there's something in that explains or gives us a sense of burnout. I mean, there are also going to be a small group of people that, that have, quote unquote, made it to the end of their career, have had what we might term a successful career in both art or commercial photography. Do you find in those relationships that it tends to be a certain personality type or approach that can make the long run, or is it really pretty random and there's characters on both ends?
Yeah, I think it can, everybody will have a different story. But I think the common thing, and if I was to give advice, it would be to be true to yourself. Your actions should be motivated by what you want and not what other people's expectations are. So that may, like, I think about, when you were just talking about that, I think about photographer Cartier-Bresson, who at the end of his life and certainly his career shifted from photography. And he always painted and drew, but at a point, after his photo career, he went back to doing that and didn't take pictures. And I think that's great. But there's other people like Avedon or Steichen who shot till the day they died, literally. Avedon was working on a campaign for Levi's, when he passed away in his, I think, early 80s or late 70s. So there are people who I admire, who I think are extraordinary artists, where their photography came to an end. And again, something that I tell my students, and I like to practice myself, sometimes you need to put the camera down. And if you don't, that's when you run into that burnout thing. But if you can say, you know what, I'm not creative, I don't feel creative, or I don't want to take pictures, honor that. And you can put your camera down. It doesn't mean it's ended, but sometimes those breaks not only are good, but they're necessary. So I think a lot of times, and again, it comes from, I think, our culture, where we have to, produce, and whether that's art or, going to your job in an office building every day, there's this expectation. And oftentimes those external expectations aren't healthy. They're not put in place to make your life better. They're put in place either to gratify somebody else or make somebody else feel better or make more or whatever it is. And I think that it's really important to make that decision yourself and not allow other people to make it. So it's hard, because when you do either step away from that commercial arena, or you do put the camera down, or you change direction, sometimes people, their first thought is, well, what happened? What's wrong? Like it's a bad thing. And it doesn't, that's usually not the case. Again, if you're true to yourself, you're like, oh no, this is, putting my camera in the closet for a month or weeks or whatever it is was the best thing I ever did. Because then you can either go back to it, or you find a new way to express yourself and you start over again. And you're able to replay that, but with a different process or a different medium. Really important. So the expectation can be very dangerous if you don't, if you're not true to yourself. But I would never be critical of somebody who said, I just needed to stop. That's a really valid thing to say and to do.
This comes up too often. Probably an episode that I get branded often, a communist or socialist. But I agree with you. What resonates with me is this external pressure to produce in this industrial way. I wonder if that's where, especially for starting out, quote unquote, art photographers, this paradigm of the commercial photographer becomes so evil, this like sellout mentality. But, I suppose that's not the case at all, is it? It doesn't need to be, I guess.
Doesn't need to be. And you know, and again, you know, depending on what day you ask me, I would probably have a different opinion of the commercial world. And you know, our society is all about consumerism. You know, most of what we experience, whether it's the internet or social media or TV, is literally focused on consuming. And that can be products or things or food or a lifestyle. And that, again, in a vacuum is really unhealthy. But at the same time, it can be marvelous. Like I love new things, technology, advancements. It's great. I really, really love that. But there's so much more to life. And I think that's where the disconnect is. And again, even coming back to this pandemic, I think it's allowed us, or maybe forced us, even to a small degree, to learn that 100% of our life isn't defined by those things. A funny story, and again, this sort of speaks to this kind of dichotomy of my feelings are, flyers in the mail, for grocery stores or whatever it is, and people putting those stickers, no junk, they called it junk mail. And yes, it's unsolicited material, but I photographed for those things. I shot bags of peas for Superstore and, running shoes for the sports stores. And so that media was my livelihood. So in a way, I'm like, yeah, no more junk mail. It's too much trees and it's just clogging up. But the other half of me is saying, but that's part of how I earn a living. And I don't know how to reconcile that. Like I say, one day I'm against it and the other day I'm like, I'm for it. I guess moderation is maybe the word, and learning that if I need a pair of shoes, I would like some ability to either research or see what's out there, what's available, hear what people, what's on sale. But at the same time, I also need to be able to get away from that because it's a very shallow part of what a person's existence should be.
A phrase came to mind, people are looking for a hill to die on, I guess. When I interviewed Donna Schwartz, and she brought up her research sort of infiltrating a particular city's photographic community. And an interesting thing that she brought up was that it tended to be these sort of camera club people, the hobbyists, that had the strongest opinions about what is real and what is not real photography, quote unquote, like authentic. And she also brought up this idea that, I guess, modern fine art, I've always had a bit of a bone to pick about what contemporary art is, that we, essentially that we need to force or to structure a narrative for it to have value. That it's sort of a bygone era where you could have like an auteur, you could have a single photograph that changes the world, or a single painting that would, end a war or whatever it is. I think it kind of sums up everything we're talking about. I mean, is that an important part of being an artist, being a photographer, is that we need to, I was just talking to Eric Donovan. He brought up a book that talked about how we need to create fictions, that we need to create stories in order to survive as a society.
100% agree with that. I think storytelling is what makes us human. And again, you go back to, the cave people sitting around a campfire, verbalizing it or painting it on the walls, writers doing novels and painters painting and photographers taking photographs. That's really what it comes down to. We tell stories. And the great thing is that everything that makes a good campfire story, or everything that makes a masterpiece in the storytelling of a painting, it's all the same. Music, painting, photography, writing, all of those elements that make a good story are identical no matter how you tell it. And that's crucial. And I think there is an element of elevation, sort of that highbrow art critic, those certain galleries. We can learn from those people, those critics, and there's a lot of what they say is smart. But I've gotten just as much, I've learned just as much, maybe reading an artist statement or a critique on an exhibition, as I have from listening to a 6-year-old who's looking at something, saying why they like it. Both of those are super valid, and they should not exist, I think, without the other. And again, here we're back at that seesaw, is that we can learn as much from a hobbyist or a 6-year-old as we can from a doctorate artistic critic. And we should seek both of those out, because it will add. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. I've rolled my eyes at a lot of artist statements, I'll tell you, but there's certainly a value there. There's a value no matter who, and I think that's the responsibility of the artist. If you put a piece of your work up on the wall, or you put it on social media, you have a responsibility to listen to what everybody says. You don't have to agree with what everybody says, but I think you have to hear what everybody says.
My final thought on that is, how do we elicit a balanced response from the audience? I mentioned earlier, so I have a friend from the Netherlands, and he said the two things that irritate him the most is he doesn't understand why we can turn right on a red. He thinks that's the worst thing ever, because it's such a stressful situation because you're always in danger. And the other thing is culturally, the Dutch are famous among, I think Belgians do this too, where their language is structured around just telling people exactly what they think and then just working it out. Whereas the North American, I don't know if it's the puritanical Christian, influence, but we will do the opposite. People will go out of their way to not reveal how they really feel.
Really interesting.
How have you been feeling as far as getting that feedback? Because I agree with you. I think getting both sides of the story is super important. But like when I produce my magazine, when I have this podcast, when I've had my little shows, I don't get to hear people tell me why they hate it. I just hear people either, like you said, the worst is they are completely ambivalent, or they pat you on the back and tell you that everything's going to be okay. How have you been able to get that full conversation? Or is that something you can even control?
Well, I think parts of it you can control, but only the internal parts. So people will say whatever they have to say, and either they'll be clear or they'll camouflage what they're trying to say, like you talk about, and either they'll be positive or they'll be negative. And like I say, I think listening to it helps you to deepen maybe what your creative process will be going forward. But when it all comes down to it, you have to be, again, I'll say it again, you have to be true to yourself. Don't take a picture. And it's hard. And again, I say this, but I probably don't practice it as often or as much as I should. I post a picture on Instagram and I want the likes. I want people to like it. And that's the poison in social media. Because if I like it, that's the most important thing. And if not everybody does, well, maybe that's an opportunity for me to find out why. And then to incorporate that into my process. Or, well, I mean, it's really hard. And again, I think every person is different. Every creator is different, and every audience member is different. And that interaction between them is different. But I think the very first thing you need to do is to be honest and true to yourself. You have to have respect for either who or what you're taking photographs of, and you equally have to have respect to the people who are looking at it. I mean, you put it out there, so it's not fair to suddenly disregard something that somebody says because you don't agree with it. You have to not agree with it, but you have to allow them to voice their opinion. And maybe it might be an exercise, maybe, that if somebody is not clear when they're talking about your work, push them a little, ask them why, and do it in a way that keeps the door open, not so that you can argue with them or shut them down or call them stupid, but so that you can both maybe grow from that conversation. It's hard though. We have egos, all of us do. I have an ego. I want everybody to love my work and think it's the greatest, but that's not realistic. Not even for me. I don't even think everything I do is great. But again, it's that maybe that social aspect of getting that feedback is an opportunity for us to learn and for us to educate. And that's what that feedback is, or what it could be. So yeah, I think, like I said, I think you have that control of how you accept feedback. It's also your responsibility to, to talk about what you do and why you do it. And if you've made a mistake, you can fix it. And maybe it's the same for somebody else who didn't understand your work. Through that conversation, they take a new understanding and go, oh, okay, now I can look at everything in a different way with, maybe a broader scope than I did. And I think that that's really important.
I befriended a painter at a coffee shop, Bob Pierce, and he said one of the biggest negative effects that happened in Calgary was, I think there used to be a prominent art critic that used to write for a newspaper, but when she retired, nobody took her place, and this sort of balancing voice disappeared from the art scene in Calgary. But it just reminded me of that conversation, because I guess that's, again, the word critic has such a negative connotation in modern times, but maybe that's what it's for. Like I think I met with you first at the portfolio review a couple years ago, but having seen some shows and kind of bumping into you, but something like that where there's an environment where it's encouraged to get criticism. But it is an interesting thing you bring up by the ego, determining my motivation of posting anything, even having a show.
Yeah, and I mean it's tough because I think artists have this ironic need to be accepted or to exhibit what they do, but they're very fragile when it comes to people's reaction to it. And I don't know if that will ever change. I think that's just the nature of being an artist. But I think, like I said before, I think the best thing that you can do is create an opportunity for somebody to tell you what they think about your work, and then listen to what they say. And maybe there's a conversation that happens after that, which should be great. And critics, I think people, they hate critics if they don't get a favorable review. They think they're smart if they do get a favorable review. But I think it's an important aspect. But a critic doesn't have to be a learned, adult. A lot of them are. They have, experience in education. But art can be really emotional, and the thing I like about, I mentioned the little kids talking about work, they just tell you what they're thinking. They've not yet, developed the ability to pussyfoot around. They just tell you what they think, and they're not trying to be mean if they don't like it. It's just how they feel. And I think those honest expressions are really, really great. So yeah, listen to them all, the big kids and the little ones.
We need more little kids at galleries.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's absolutely true. The galleries and the art world, I think it's certainly 2 or 3 decades ago was a very elite thing, and people felt intimidated. And this is, I think, one of the benefits of social media is it's allowed people to look at art, if you will, in the comfort of.
If you could tell the world one thing, what would it be?
Be curious. I think, it shows. It's the way you learn, I guess. It's to be curious. And I don't know, compassionate, I guess. We're not seeing a lot of that nowadays. That's important. I think those two things are really great motivators for experiencing life. Curiosity and compassion.
I think they go hand in hand, frankly.
Yeah, I think so too. Absolutely.
Awesome.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it was great.
Here, we're at a little over an hour, and I thought we were going to run out of things to say. We didn't, so that's good.
Here's another message from one of our 2 sponsors today. This episode of My Viewfinder is brought to you by the Calgary Foundation, proudly supporting community needs for 65 years. Empathy, kindness, generosity. We are united in our desire to give, to inspire hope, and transform the lives of people who are struggling in turbulent times. And the Calgary Foundation is here to help. From mental health programs to environmental causes, the Community Knowledge Center website features profiles of charitable organizations, all searchable by area of interest. Be inspired by compelling stories. Be informed of innovative work. Be responsive to the needs. To connect to hundreds of outstanding charitable organizations serving our community, visit ckc.calgaryfoundation.org. To learn more about Calgary Foundation, visit calgaryfoundation.org. So, bearing in mind Greg's triangle, the art form itself, the subject matter, and the audience, let's take a moment to look at our own published work. Whether it's on social media, in a show, or in a magazine or a book, have we engaged in a conversation with our audience? Can we objectively say that we cast the best light on our subject, even if that didn't result in that glamour? Are we continually searching for new methods to engage in these processes? For my part, I've struggled with both the subject and audience aspect. I'd like to suggest that I'm open for criticism and that I have the best intentions when I photograph anything, but I can't say for sure. It's an ethical problem in candid street photography. It's a difficult conversation on social media, and our cultural norms of being polite put a barrier in engaging in critical conversations. Never mind our ego and emotional sensitivity. Perhaps my suggestion this week is to find peers and other artists you respect. It's probably a big ask to suggest you form a collective, at least right away, but surrounding yourselves with artists you admire, who then can be encouraged to mentor you through constructive criticism, may be the only way we can continue to grow in this practice. Do you have an opinion that might surprise people?
Yeah, I like Nickelback.
Oh no.
See, there, I just surprised you. I think they're good. I like them.
That's great. I'll leave it at that.